G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. It is actually spring here in Australia at the moment and it is just beautiful. The weather is amazing where I am and it has inspired me. All of my bulbs are coming up in the garden and it has inspired me to make a new little doll for you all. She's very sweet and she's obviously a little flower rag doll. Now she is so incredibly simple to make. And just imagine her in all sorts of colours. She's made primarily out of felt with some little fabric legs. You can do all sorts of embellishment with her. You've got a free pattern, of course, and a full tutorial. Your free pattern is in the drop-down description box below. You'll find the link there. Just click on where it says see more. And you can print out your own pattern templates on your own home printer. There's a blurb that I put there for you too, so check that out before printing. That will help you with that. Also, there is a measuring marker on every page that will also help you make sure you're getting all your pattern pieces right. I always include all seam allowances within my patterns, so you don't have to worry about any of that. You can just cut out and get ready to go. So let's get busy and make a beautiful little flower rag doll. Okay, so let's run through our materials and requirements and your pattern pieces you're going to need to make our little flower doll. This doll is predominantly made of felt. We do make her in felt except for her legs, because of the way that she's put together in the closings. You can use pure wool felt like I am, or you can use a washable acrylic. Both will work well. There will just be a couple of differences which I will point out as we go along. Let's start with our body pieces. Now for me, this design is based on basically that she's a little spring bulb. So she has a little sort of almost a little pear-shaped body. I've used a green felt to indicate the green part of the plant. I have interfaced my felt. You must do that with a fusible woven cotton interfacing. So we have our body pieces, 4 of those. Then we're going to move on to the arms. Now the arms, because of the way they're attached and put together, they also are cut from felt. I'm using a beautiful spring green, so I'm changing up the green just to vary it a little. And I've cut the arm pieces from felt with fusible webbing applied. We're using the fusible webbing because it just strengthens the felt a little bit. We're going to be sewing on the outside with a tiny blanket stitch and then stuffing it. So we need it to be just a little bit stronger. So you can see there, that's one arm already done. Beautiful little filled arm there. Let's move on to the legs. Oh, also with the arms, we're going to be attaching the arms with buttons. So a little button each side that will suit the size. That's probably, I would say, around about a 15mm button, maybe just a little bit bigger. Then we're going to be making the legs out of just your normal quilting cotton, any kind of print cotton, and I'm staying with the greens, but I'm using just a little bit of a pattern. So I thought about making the brown. You could make the legs brown like sort of the roots of the plant, but I love this fabric, so we're going to go with this one. So I've got my fabric doubled over here, right sides together, and I have traced all the way around my template, but we don't cut them out because we're going to be sewing directly on that line. It's the easiest way to make very fine little arms and legs without fiddling with trying to put edges together. So you need a piece of fabric doubled over, enough to accommodate the 2 legs. Then we get to the all-important face. Let's move all this out the way. So the face is made up of a few things. So the flower that surrounds the little face, I've cut my 2 pieces. This one's already stitched up. This is how it looked. And we've got 2. So I'm using a deeper shade of yellow for the center, and then the lighter shade of yellow is going to show on the underside. So when it's all put together, this will receive the same treatment as this one. We've got those lovely curved petals and the little face sits in the middle. It's all attached with a button joint. So you will need either to be using pure wool felt, which is, it's more dense than the washable acrylic. If you're using pure wool felt, you just cut it, just the felt piece with nothing added to it. If you're using washable acrylic, I would use what I call double felt, where you join 2 sheets of felt together with your fusible webbing, then you cut your pattern piece out of it because it gives it a little more substance. Like I said, pure wool felt is a little stronger, so you make your own judgment there. This, once it's all sewn up, and when we do add that blanket stitching, it firms up those edges as well. So you can use any colour there, of course, and it's always nice to have 2 different tones of the same colour. You'll get more dimension that way. So for the little face, we need a base for the face, and you can make that 2 ways. I'm using a 50mm wooden disc, and I've drilled 2 holes either side to make it like a button. We don't need this centre hole. I'm using a wooden disc because I have them and it's nice and strong. You can make yourself the same disc out of matte board if you like. So this is picture framing matte board. Very, very solid. So you can cut your disc out of that. If you want it super strong, cut 2 of them, glue them together with PVA glue. Even 1 disc in matte board is going to be enough support for this little face, but I prefer to use the wooden disc. On top of that, we are adding 2 Fusible Foam circles. They are the same size as your disc. They're going to stack on top of each other, and then we're going to be covering that with our felt, which is going to pull around the underside. So the felt I'm using for the middle is a lovely orange variegated, it's a heathered felt, and it will work beautifully for the centre, and the face details will still show up well on that. So don't go too dark with the face section, because you want to be able to see the eyes and the mouth clearly. So speaking of eyes and mouth, for the eyes, I'm just using a beautiful little simple black button. These are around about 10 to 12mm in size. You don't want them too big, too small, and they'll look a bit piercing. So 10 to 12 is about perfect. We also need a button for actually attaching the head through the back of the body. So just a button around about 15, anything up to 20mm is fine. It can be 2-hole or 4-hole. You will need extra strong thread throughout and pearl thread for your sewing, your blanket stitching. And we're going to be filling with polyester filling. So that's really about it. You will need some extra felt because I'm going to be making a little leaf peplum skirt that goes around her when she's all done. So just keep some extra felt aside. And I've got a couple of green tones there again, and we'll be adding a couple of little beads in between that. That's completely optional, but you'll see me put that together at the end. You can decide whether or not you go ahead and do that. So let's begin by making, first of all, we're going to make the legs, because they need to be ready to add into the actual body itself. So your first step is to take your traced little legs to the machine, and you're going to sew right on that line. You're going to leave the top edge open. So when you start, make sure you back and forth on your start and finish to reinforce it. And you're going to sew directly on that line all the way around. I have my machine stitch length set to 1.8. It's nice and small. You only need to sew them once. And then we're going to cut them out and leave just about a 3mm seam allowance all the way around and cut them straight across the top. So once I've cut out those legs that they've all been stitched up, I've turned them through. Now you need to turn them through very gently. Take a knitting needle right down to the end, and you want to push out all of those seams. When you're sewing these, you're going to get a really beautiful, accurate finish with some gorgeous curves because you can sew directly on that line. It just makes it more exact. So do take your time doing it so you do get those lovely curves. And this is the little completed leg. You can see all filled out. We've got a little knee bend in the middle and closed at the top. So a nice little posable leg. So all we need to do now is take our original template. You've got a mark that shows you where we're going to be sewing across to make that little knee bend. So I just lay that on top and I'm just going to take my pin through, right through there. And now I can go ahead and I can stuff the lower part of the leg. Now, when you're doing this, forceps are the best, just little pieces initially, and you want to support the end of that foot because we don't have interfacing on this. So it's quite delicate, but our stitching was very small. Remember that 1.8 length? So it's quite strong in its own way. You want to pack it super firm, but be very aware of supporting that end to not put your forceps through the end. So you can see little toe is filled out. We go on at our next piece. And we're going to fill this lower leg section right up until about 1 centimetre from where our pin is, and pack it firm all that way. You can see how already that little foot is taking shape. Watch that you're keeping those seams nice and straight as you're doing it. Take your time with this. It's not just about pushing stuffing into an opening, it's about sculpting as you go. So watch the shape that it's making. And I don't know if you can see, but this is very, very solid. It's really, really firm all the way up to here, and then 1 centimetre of space, because if we don't leave a space, we can't get it under the machine to stitch across, and also the lower part of the leg won't drop. If we fill it right up to there, the leg won't bend. We fill the top section right up to there, that gives us a knee. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Keep filling. I'll stop at 1 centimetre and then I'll show you how we sew across that knee joint. So once you have that little lower leg all filled out, we've left a space there. We are now going to stitch straight across where we made that pin mark. We're going to sew 1, 2, 3 times across, and make sure that you match your thread colour as close as you can to your fabric so it will be largely invisible as it is with this one. So with that stitching in place, we now have that lovely knee joint. Now we're going to stuff the top section. This time we're going to do it in reverse because we're going to pack the knee section super firm here. So we're going to take that filling, make sure you're keeping that centre seam nice and straight, and we're going to pack out that section there. Super firm all the way to that line. You'll see that the knee still drops, the lower leg still drops, and we're going to fill the top section until, again, this time about 1.5 centimetres from the end, that you leave empty, like we have with this one. So it's filled, then it stops, because this has to be sewn into the body, and we do want that room for the little leg to also drop from the body. So fill tight from the knee, finish about 1.5 centimetres from the edge, then go ahead, make sure your seams are lined up here, and then just temporarily stitch that across on the machine so that filling's not going to escape. So that completes our second little leg, and we can put those aside, and we are going to start working on the arms. So this is our one completed arm, and I'm first of all going to remove the backing paper which has the fusible webbing on it. Like I said, we're using it for strength. It just bonds the back of that felt really well. I'm going to put right sides together because we're not turning this through. You need to make sure that your cutting out is really spot on with this project, as in every project. And I'm just going to clip those two together at the end there and just halfway down. I'm working with extra strong thread in a deeper green colour. I often use extra strong thread for my embroidery. It's very strong, the thread doesn't fatigue like embroidery thread does. You can also use, if you like, a 8-ply pearl thread will work for this as well. I'm going to start my sewing. We're going to be sewing a little tiny blanket stitch. It's almost a buttonhole stitch. I'm starting just a little way down. You've got marks on your pattern template that show you where. So I'm going to take my needle in between the felt layers themselves on one of the pieces. Bring that through. I've got a knot in the end and that will just hold. So keeping those edges perfectly together, we're going to start our tiny blanket stitch. So stitches are probably only about 2 millimeters. I take my needle through all of the layers and I bring my needle out through the thread loop and pull that nice and firm. Travel along, my needle through all the layers, again bringing my needle out through the thread loop. That's going to bind to that edge and it's going to get rid of all of our raw edges and it's going to bind it really firm, and it's also a really lovely finish in little fine dolls like this. You get this lovely sort of little rim around the whole outside of the limb that I just love it. I love seeing the work in sewn dolls. I like to see the stitches. So you can see that not only is it making those stitches, it's got a little binding line across. So it's really important that as you go, that you rotate your work as you go around those corners and curves, so that all of those stitches are radiating out as they should. You don't want them slanting. And you'll just continue on all the way around that limb until you get back to the other mark on the other side, and then leave your needle and thread on. So now that I've finished my stitch all the way around, I've left my needle and thread on because we're going to want to continue and close that top opening. But first we have to stuff that limb, and all we're going to do is exactly what we did with those legs. And you're going to take your forceps if you have them. Certainly the easiest way to stuff these little limbs. Also, let me show you first, when you're working with the felt and you've been holding it and stitching it, remember we've got that fusible web in between. Take your forceps down first and make sure it's not all stuck together. It won't be permanently stuck, it just might be a little bit tacky. And we are going to go in, same thing, supporting the end, and really pack that arm full. And with this one, we're going to pack it firm all the way up to the top, almost to the very edge. You can use your wool felting needle to tuck in those fibres at the top once you're right the way up to there, so that they're just out of the way and we're going to be able to sew that opening closed. You see there that at the very top there's not quite as much filling. So once you've got it to there, go ahead and continue on and finish that stitching off. So we have two perfect little arms done. We're now going to move on to the body itself. Now you've got your 4 body pieces, so you've got 2 pairs. What we're going to do now is put right sides together with each of those, and we are going to overcast and stitch the front centre seam and the back, what will be the back centre seam on each of those. It's this side, not the side that has the mark on it. Okay, so we're going to overcast it first. You definitely need to overcast it. Everything needs to be really well lined up. And then you're going to sew that seam on the machine with a 4mm seam allowance, and you'll sew it 2 times. So one line of stitching straight over the top of the other. And of course, always make sure you back and forth on your start and finish. Do that with this one and with this one. Now make sure once you've stitched both the front and back centre seam, go ahead and remove your overcasting stitch so that you can open out that seam and flatten it out. You also want to go ahead and really roll that seam out so you've got those beautiful curves. Then we're going to take one of those pairs, it doesn't matter which one because the front and the back is the same, and you can see there that what I've done is I've just clipped the legs into place right along the seam line with the toes facing towards the body, and the distance from the centre seam, you can mark it in if you like. It is just 1 1/4 centimetres from the centre seam each side. That's where the leg starts. Okay, so I've clipped those in place. Check that they're matched up exactly the same. Have a look at how they're sitting. You might want to swap the legs over. If one's turning out more than the other, that looks pretty good to me. So we are going to go ahead. All I'm going to do is just tack those in place within the seam allowance, just with my extra strong thread. So they're nice and secure, and when we sew the body together, which is our next step, they're going to be nicely incorporated into that seam. So just right on the edge, it's about a 2mm seam, and they'll be captured nicely. I'll do the same with the other side. Very important that they're matching either side. Okay, so now I've got those little legs tacked in place. She looks like a little frog at this stage, doesn't she? Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together of these body pieces, and you want to tuck those legs in. You're going to put right sides together, and you're first going to match up the centre front and back seam at the bottom there. And you'll open those seams out so that they really line up. Put a clip in there. Then you can go ahead and clip this or pin it all the way up until your 2 side marks match. This is the point to which we're going to sew. Do the same the other way. Tuck those little legs in there out of the way. Make sure you're not catching them. Again, line up on the other side. It's getting tight there with those little feet. And we are going to go ahead and we're going to overcast from this mark all the way around, incorporating those legs up to the other mark. You will overcast it first, and then you will sew that seam 2 times. When you're starting off and finishing, make sure you back and forth to reinforce that. And also when you're going over the leg area, make sure you go over that a couple of times so that it's really secure, and make sure you're capturing that leg well within the seam. Keep that seam to 4mm seam allowance. Once you've done that, you can just pull on those legs and you can turn that whole body through. So I now have that body turned through. Check that those legs are beautifully incorporated and everything's sitting nice and straight when your little doll sits up, which it does. And now, while we still have access to it, we can easily sew each of those arms on with our button. So you need to make a measurement from your last stitch here where that seam opens up. We've got where we had our mark. It's exactly 1.5 centimetres down. Make a little mark there, and I'm using my little green button here. I've got my extra strong thread. So first of all, I like to position my button well on the top part of the arm so that I know that it's going to stay in the right spot. Doesn't matter if you're using a 4-hole button or a 2-hole. I only use 2 holes to actually sew it on. So now that's got that button sitting in the right place, I can dive into my little body there, come across and just start the process of sewing that little arm on. I've still got plenty of access there. Just going to bring that needle out. Pull that in nice and tight so it's in the right spot, and continue sewing straight through, back and forth. You can get through into that body cavity, so that back and forth just enough times to make sure it's nice and secure, and cast off on the back, and do check that it's nice and even with the other side. So now I have both the little arms sewn in place, we're going to fill this body. You can just completely fill the body with polyester filling. I'm going to add a little bit of fine aquarium gravel in the base. You could use toy fill pellets, plastic pellets. It just gives it a little bit of weight, but it absolutely will sit fine if you just stuff it with your polyester filling, but you do need to fill it nice and firm. What you're going to do is fill out all of those lovely curves, both at the sides and back and front, and fill right up to the top here. We're going to be closing this top section from here to here with a blanket stitch, but you need to get filling right up to here, and use your wool felting needle if you have one to pack it all in so it's sitting nice and even and out of your way, so that we can close that opening. The top section here is much flatter. It's not completely bulbous with stuffing. You can also half sew it, add some more stuffing, and then continue on, but I'll show you that when we get to there. For now, I'm just going to get that little body filled. So that has my body filled. You can see it's nice and firm. What I've done at the top there is clipped those 2 seams together. I've opened out the seams, flattened them, and clip them to match up perfectly together. You can see my stuffing goes right up to here. What I'm going to do is take a single strand of my pearl thread, in this case. This is 8 ply. I've got a knot in the end, and I'm going to take my needle down to the base here, and we're just going to start our blanket stitch. I'm just going to get in there first and get that knot to hold. Just pull that through, and we're going to start a blanket stitch. So our blanket stitch is just the same as always. We're going through all the layers, and we're bringing our needle out through the loop, and it's going to bind the edges together in the same way that we did it on the arms, only now we're bringing these 2 edges together. You'll find as you start sewing, it will start pulling that in, and you'll be able to close that opening. Just keep to that same 4mm seam allowance as you're doing it. And keep your stitches nice and even. Try and get a thread that matches your felt colour. So you can see there, that's closing that opening. I'm just going to continue up to the top here. I will really secure those top seams together, and if you feel like you need more stuffing at that stage, you can go ahead and add it. And even you can get down to here with your closing and still add a little more as you go. Just finish off down the bottom here, dive your needle in, just make a knot, come out somewhere on a seam line, make a little surface knot, dive your needle back in and sink that knot. And so that completes our little body. You can see that top section all stitched. I added filling as I went, so this top section's nice and firm as well. That's where we're actually attaching the head. So speaking of the head, let's pop the body aside and we are going to start by working on the little flower. So the first thing you want to do with the little flower is we are going to sew that same blanket stitch all the way around the outer edge. I'm probably going to use a deeper toned gold for this one. It'll really mark it out. And it is, again, it's an 8-ply pearl thread, and I'm just going to start right in the corner here and go around every petal. Once we've done that, we're going to bring the sides in just a little bit to pinch them in. That's going to give us this little cup shape, and then we're going to put them together and alternate them. So we've got a really full flower. But for now, you can just go ahead and blanket stitch with that same blanket stitch we've been using throughout, all the way around. Make sure that you rotate your work as you go. And it really is important to do this stitch. It's a little time consuming, but you can see the difference with the edge and how it helps you curl it over. It's really just a beautiful finish, and it will keep those edges nice and secure. And if you are making this as a child's toy, it's certainly going to be more robust if it is stitched. So I'm going to get my second flower stitched, then we'll come back and show you how to pull those edges in. So now I've finished that blanket stitching all around that little second group of petals, and I'm now going to show you how we create that little pulled in look that's going to create the lovely wrap around. We're going to just take our flower petals and we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to stitch on each junction. We're going to stitch just 1 centimetre along on those two edges. So I'm going to take my needle through the fabric, through the felt here, and come out right on that corner. I'm using my extra strong thread here for this. So it's just 1 centimetre, and it's the same tiny stitch, blanket stitch, that we used on the arms. So again, you'd be an expert at this stitch now. And keep those stitches really tiny and really close together. And that's all there is to it. Just 1 centimetre on each section. Just make sure that it's really secure. And that just pulls it in just enough to create that lovely little cupped shape, which is so important to frame up the little face. So that's really it. When you get to the end here, where it's going to then open out, just do a couple of stitches right on top of each other, so it really holds well. I'm just going to backtrack and finish off with a knot. And then I can snip close to that knot. So you can see that now that's pulled that section in. And we're going to do the same with between each of those petals. So once you have your 2 flower petal pieces all done, you can just sit one inside the other. So I like to put them in with the alternate petals filling each of those spaces, and then when we add the little face, we'll have a nice full flower there. So we can put this aside and we're going to move ahead. Now we're going to make the little face. So to do that, we take our center piece of felt. Now go ahead and take your backing piece, whether you're using a wooden disc like I am or whether you've created your own out of matte board. Make sure you center it and draw around it. I've just used heat erasable marker there. That will allow you to perfectly position your foam pieces, which we're going to fuse into place. So we're going to fuse first one with a hot iron and protective cloth, and then we're going to fuse the second one on top. So it's really going to give us some lovely volume, and it allows us to sew the eye buttons on through that, and it gives it some pull in. So get both of those pieces fused into place and make sure it's really perfectly lined up with your circle. So I now have my 2 pieces of foam fused nicely to the back of that felt circle. You can now use, I've given you a little template that gives you the correct eye position. You can see where the circle of the face is. You need to use your original template for cutting that circle and find your centre and make a little mark, which is what I do with a heat erasable marker so that I can get rid of that mark. And then take your little template and place it exactly over that mark. You can actually do that by taking an awl and then taking it through that centre mark, and you'll get it perfectly centred over those foam discs. Then take a pen and make your 2 eye marks, so it will be perfectly lined up. So then I'm going to take just a strand of extra strong thread in my black, and I'm going to sew on those eyes, and make sure when you're sewing them on that you're really pulling them in, because you want them to sink in a little bit into the felt, and it gives it a lovely pulled in effect. And do the same with each eye. Check that they are lined up beautifully, and then we'll go ahead and add the little mouth. So that has my eyes sewn in, and you can see that they're pulling into that fabric. A much better look. And then you need to make 2 little marks where your mouth is going to go. You could use a little heart button for the mouth if you want to do something like that. I want just the simplest little line across. Because we've got that padding behind, it will pull in at the corners. It's about 1.5 centimetres from the eye, and the line across is about 1.25 centimetres. Just make sure that it's all lined up with the rest of the face. And I'm using just a single strand of pearl thread in a 8-ply. And I'm going to come in from behind. There's a knot there. I'm just going to take my needle through and pull it in, and it'll give it, again, some nice volume, but I'm going to go straight back over the top of that stitch again so that I'm really getting it pulled in nicely, and that little line will show up just that little bit more. Keep that tension up as you pull that in. There we go. We've just got a sweet, sweet little mouth there, just cast off on the back as you usually would. So with that little face detailing done, we're now going to take a long double strand of extra strong thread, and we're going to sew a running stitch right close to the edge, only about 2 millimeters in from the edge. Keep it nice and small, those stitches nice and small, because it'll pull in better. And we're going to sew, and start your sewing on the front face. So go in on the front face, not from behind. You're going to leave your tail ends hanging because we're going to draw up these thread ends. So just work your way all of the way around that circle. Keep it all nice and even until you get back to your start. Once you get around back to the other side, just tie a knot in your 2 groups of thread ends there. And now we're just going to get that base ready for the back of the head. So whether you're using a wooden disc like I am, or whether you're using just a mat board one, we do the same thing here. I've taken a doubled strand of extra strong thread, a long strand, and I've taken it through my needle, and now we've got 4 strands here. Just going to take my needle through that first hole that we made and the second hole. Pull it through till it's even. You've got it even on both sides. You can snip that off the needle now. And we've got the back nice and secure with 4 strands. What we're going to do is just temporarily glue this into place. It's going to help us pull those thread ends up around the base, and if there's a bit of glue there, it just helps us do that. I'm going to try and line it up with the eyes so everything's nice and straight. So just a little bit of clear craft glue will do the job. It's really just to hold it while you're tying in those threads around the face. So just line that up, pop that on, let that sit for a few minutes just to set. So once you have let that sit there just for a few minutes, just to get that adhesion working with that glue, what we're going to be doing is drawing on these thread ends to pull in that face around the back of that disc, and we'll leave these thread ends coming out through the center. This job of pulling it in is made a whole lot easier when you're working with felt. If you first, let me pull that out again, I'm going to take this to my iron and move all my threads out the way, and I'm going to warm up with my iron the surrounding felt. It's going to make it more pliable, so when you pull on those thread ends, it's all going to pull in much easier. Just a little tip there, because felt loves warmth. So let me get that warmed up, and then we'll pull that in nice and tight around the disc. So I have warmed up that outside, and I have just moved my green threads out the way. And then I've tightened that up, and I'm going to keep tightening that and pulling those edges together until I've got a really snug fit around here. And check the front and make sure you've got it all centered. That little face needs to be all beautifully centered. See how you'll get some gathering around here, but make sure that it's all even. Once you've got that super tight, pulled in as much as you can, keep the tension up, knot that off at least 4 times before you snip your thread ends. So now you can see we've got a little face that's going to sit in there beautifully amongst those petals. Okay, so the next step for doing that is we've got our threads coming off the back here, which is perfect. And we are going to take each group of 4 strands, and we're going to thread it onto a large doll needle. So I've got my one side of my 4 threads threaded onto a doll needle, and your petals, which you have put together with the alternate petals, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points, but they've all been staggered, and you've also got your marks that we put on from our start with our template. I'm going to take my needle straight through the first side, then I'm going to thread the other 4 strands onto that needle, and I'm going to take them through this side. So now I've got the little face pulled in kind of like a button, and both strands of thread coming out the back. So that's holding the petals together in the right position and the little face in place. So the way that we attach it is we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to rethread one side onto our doll needle, and we're going to take that needle through the top of the body here, to bring it out through the button at the back. Now the button just needs to sit with about 1 centimetre showing at the top. So you can put that, I might turn my button over this way, will work better. I'm only using 2 of the holes. So 1 centimetre from here that's where your button will sit. So you have to take your needle through, straight through, one side to that position. Bring it out the back through one of those holes. Pull it all the way through. Okay, so now I've got that group of threads has come through the body at the top here, straight through one of those holes in the button, and you can see it's about 1 centimetre from there. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing with the other side. We're going to come through, match it up and bring it out to come through the whole of the button here, and then we're just going to tie those off. And that's going to hold the head beautifully in place and still give us a little poseable head. Okay, so I'm making it a little more complicated than it actually is. It's just something that's a bit hard to film on camera. So now you've got those threads pulled straight through your petals, through the top of the body and through the buttons. You just have to make sure that it's all lined up. So now I've tied a preliminary knot there, so that's not going to fall off. And you can see that that little face is perfectly positioned. You're not going to get it wrong. Okay, so what we want to do is just pull on those threads until everything is really nice and pulled in and secure. And then you just knot that off at least 4 times. You can either sink your thread ends back into the body. I just snip them off. I don't mind that there's a little knot there at the back. So let me do that, and then we've got a little head in place. So there is our beautiful little flower face. Now I have taken, just because my colouring on my flower is basically 2 colours. It's yellow and green. You can bring in a 3rd colour. With any soft sculpture or artwork, bringing in a 3rd colour is a great way to make everything pull together. I've taken some, just a soft pastel, artist soft pastel chalk, and I've added 2 little soft cheeks. You can do this with artist soft pastels, which is my preferred medium for working with felt. But if you're making this for a child who's going to be playing with it, you will need to use something like just an alcohol marker would be fine, but make sure you use a colourless blender with it to blend it in. So I've just added some colour, and you can see already what that is doing and how it's made the whole project come to life. But do, if you're using artist soft pastels or your alcohol markers, blend those edges so it's nice and soft. So it's all in keeping with that lovely soft felt. So those are those lovely cheek marks, which I think you'll agree really just makes such a difference. Now this is our little doll up to here. Now you can certainly just make her up like that. I'm going to show you how to make a really sweet little peplum leaf skirt that goes around her middle. Mine is just a little shelf sitter, so adding that extra detail is really lovely. But you can certainly just make her plain. You could, all you clever people who like to do embroidery, you could do all sorts of embroidery on the belly. But right now, super, super sweet, but let's make her a little skirt. So to create a really simple little skirt around our doll, I've taken a double strand of what is 5-ply pearl thread this time in greens to match my project, and I have cut, I've given you a template, I've cut about 14 felt leaves. Now again, please remember that I'm using a really high grade pure wool felt, so it's very dense and it's very thick. It cuts nice and clean. If you're using an acrylic felt, you may want to make these leaves out of double felt. Remember, double felt is 2 pieces of felt joined together, fused together with fusible webbing, and then you cut your shapes out of that. That will make them a lot thicker. If you do make double felt, it means that you can put 2 different colours of felt together and you'll get this look. What I'm doing is I'm going to be alternating my leaves, so I've got the different colours going around. So you'll also need some little beads. I'm using 10mm just natural coloured wooden beads. This is really simple. All you need to do is pinch together the top of each leaf. You want to take your needle, which has your pearl thread on it, straight through. It's probably just under a centimetre. Pull that through, then add a bead. And then we're going to add the next one. Pinch that top, straight through, pull it through, add another bead. It's going to give a lovely pleated look to that skirt that gives you this beautiful leaf shape. Just each time I'm alternating my colours and I'm adding another bead. Your beads may not be the same size as mine, so how many leaves you need will depend on the size of the bead that you're using. But you can see we're just going to continue on till that can string all the way around that little belly. And it gives her that sweet little skirt. Let me get them all threaded up. So that's my beautiful little peplum skirt. You can see, gorgeous effect. As you pull on that, it pulls all the little leaves nice and tight. And just add as many leaves and beads as you need to fully cover around her waist. I'm going to try that on her and add any extra if I need to. You simply just tie it up behind her. So I have just gone ahead and tied that little peplum skirt in place. You can see at the back there, I have finished, no bead in between the final two leaves. I've come all the way around, and to hold that skirt in place, if you like, you can do what I did. I take my needle on that last leaf into the body and bring it out. I rethread the other side, do the same thing. Now that I've knotted that off, it's going to stay permanently in the right position. Then the front can sit however you want to place it. Mine is just a beautiful little shelf sitter. In the end, I used 18 leaves and 17 little beads. So that will give you an idea of what you need to cut out. Like I said, yours may be different depending on the size of the beads that you use. Can you just imagine her made up in all of the different colours? You can also take this project further with your detailing. You could blanket stitch around every leaf. You could add detailing into those leaves. You certainly could put shading in through here. You could airbrush this. Really, they could be quite amazing. What I'm showing you here today is just a really beautiful, simple little project. What a perfect gift for someone. They just are so joyful, and even the way that the little faces are looking up towards the sun and the light. I've loved making this one. I wish I had time, I'd make them in so many different colours. I'm looking forward to seeing a whole field of flowers from you all. Thank you all so much for joining me. I've had a whole lot of fun. So what do you all think? If you are in a place in the world where the weather is perhaps not quite so lovely at the moment, I hope this little girl will cheer you up. Come along and join our Facebook page, and I want to see just a field of flowers coming up there. Come along and join. I'll put the link down below. You can post any project that you've made from any of my patterns, both masterclass and right here on Pay It Forward. I think you're all going to have a whole lot of fun with this one. Please show me her in lots and lots of colours. I don't have time for that. I'm trusting all of you will. And I want to see lots of different variations. So thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Have a fantastic creative week, hopefully full of colour. And remember always to pay all of those good things forward. Until next time, it is hooroo from me.